Welcome to the special edition of the People's Daily Talk. I'm Xiaomeng in Beijing. Right now, I'm at the Media Center of the China International Fair for Trading Services. The Media Center of the China Service Fair is located at the headquarters of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. So today we're really honored to have Mr. Joachim von Amsberg, Vice President of the AIIB. Hello, Joachim. Will you please say hello to the audience of the People's Daily English Language app?
Hello, and very nice to see you all.
Joachim, we are really curious about the AIIB's measures and policies in the future to ease the negative financial impacts brought by the COVID-19 to AIIB members. Could you briefly introduce our audience with what AIIB has done and will do in the future?
On the one hand, of course, the crisis has had a direct health impact, meaning people are getting sick, people need medical care, in some cases overwhelming the hospital systems of our member countries. On the other hand, the crisis has brought an economic downturn that is unprecedented really for almost all of our member countries. And so our member countries are fighting with both of those crises, the health crisis and the economic crisis, in different ways. Some countries have controlled the virus very well, but they are struggling with economics. Other countries are still in the midst of really the health crisis, protecting their population from the virus. So given that our members are so profoundly affected and that there is a real threat to economic and social development and the well-being of people in our member countries, early on in the crisis, we decided to really redirect our efforts on the special needs that our members have in this crisis situation. So we created what we call a COVID-19 crisis recovery facility. We set aside an amount which is now up to $13 billion for special investments that we would make that respond to the changed needs of our members in this crisis. And by those changed needs, I mean first investments that really address the health emergency. So these are investments to help countries build emergency hospitals, ramp up their testing capabilities, their tracking and tracing capabilities, and do all the other things that need to be done to battle the health side of the crisis. At the same time, we also help members in the economic crisis. And they are really, because of the lockdown and the restrictions that many countries put in place, it's a very special kind of crisis where you essentially have put the economy into a deep freezer. And the measures that we're supporting are related to letting people and economic activities survive in this deep freeze period. And that means we are lending to governments for their extraordinary budgetary expenditure so that they can put in place the programs to support people, social expenditure programs, insurance program, and the many other different types of programs that governments have installed to literally help people survive, buy food, maintain their housing and all that. But also we have put in place programs to finance companies and industries to prevent viable companies from going bankrupt, allowing them to finance working capital, operating expenditures, something we would not typically finance, but in this crisis we feel that is really important to maintain the structure, the fabric of the economies in our members. And so in that way we have responded to this crisis with this extraordinary effort.
And talking about the health crisis and financial crisis brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic, so has the AIIB given more priority to the developing countries in terms of helping them battle the health and financial crisis, or we just basically treat developed countries and developing countries on the equal basis?
Well, in general, like other multilateral development banks, we focus our activities on developing countries. And in this crisis even more so, as you're rightly saying, the needs of developing countries are more severe. In particular, the needs of the poorer developing countries are severe because they don't have access to financial markets to the same extent that relatively more advanced developing and, of course, developed countries have. So we have expanded and extended programs to both the lower income countries and middle income countries in our membership. But on the health side in particular, we have focused on countries that really need additional financial resources. We have made financing available for health investments in countries like the Maldives, like Bangladesh, but also middle-income countries like India, Indonesia, were countries where we have made significant amount of financing available to help those countries. So each country faces slightly different challenges. We are there to serve the needs of all our members who come to us, but we recognize that low-income countries that do not have access to markets and financing for markets have a particular need to depend on development banks like the AIIB. And in fact, we have put in place a special facility to subsidize the loans to our low-income countries. So while we generally charge the same interest rates for lending to governments of all our members, in this crisis period we have put a special program in place to reduce the interest rate on our loans to low-income countries, to allow them to battle this crisis without overstretching their financial capabilities. And we have found very good response to that effort.
And do you think that the COVID-19 has changed the agenda of the AIIB? And will the AIIB slow down its pace to bring in more members because of the pandemic?
So the pandemic has certainly had an impact on AIIB. It does not change our long-term orientation. In the long term, our mission is to invest in infrastructure of tomorrow, environmentally, socially, financially sustainable infrastructure. The huge need for that remains. So the long-term objective remains the same. But in the short to medium term, countries have changed their priorities. Fewer countries today are thinking about the long term and therefore invest in long-term projects. Many countries have to think about short-term priorities, and we want to be there to help them. In two areas in particular, we are expanding our efforts. One is the digital infrastructure, because in this crisis period, the adoption of digital technology has been accelerated, so there has been increased demand for digital services. Secondly, healthcare. We had not before invested in healthcare, and we now see health infrastructure as one area where our clients have demand in the crisis, and in all likelihood also in the future after the crisis. So we will very likely build up our investments in health infrastructure, and with a particular focus on technology and digital innovation, where we see huge potential for expanding services and making healthcare service available to a much broader share of the population. In fact, we see that because of the pressures of the crisis, some countries are accelerating their ratification and their membership because they want to benefit from our financing. So we don't see a slowdown in membership interest. In fact, we do see interest from additional countries who would like to join us so that they can benefit from AIIB financing.
And we know that this year's China International Fair for Trading Services set up its media center right now at the Asia Financial Center, the headquarters of the AIIB. So do you think that the China Service Fair shares some common goals and aspirations, common interests with the AIIB, and what are those?
Well, we're actually very happy to see the International Fair for Trade and Services come to our headquarters building, our new headquarters building that we've just recently occupied. Because trade and services actually lies at the heart of our business. So we are providing international financial services, international investment. So there are many aspects of our business that are directly implying trade and services. So first of all, of course, finance across borders is trade and services, financial services. But infrastructure projects very often, if not always, include a very large share of international consulting services, engineering services, and of course digital services. So in fact, successful infrastructure projects very much depend on the trade and services, and are a good example for how trade and services is becoming increasingly important and increasingly a driver for global growth, and is gaining in importance relative to the trade in goods, which has been the traditional, more often considered aspect of trade. Now, we in fact have set one of our priorities as connecting countries in our membership, promoting regional cooperation, promoting cross-border connectivity and investment. And while that is meant to facilitate trade across countries, it is likewise supporting trade and services across countries. And again, whether that's consulting, engineering services, financial services, or increasingly and most importantly, digital services. So yet just another reason why we at AIIB are very happy to see the Trade and Services Fair happen here in our headquarter building.
Thank you for coming to the studio of the People's Daily during the CIFTIS. And we're really happy to see more projects of the AIIB carrying out during the post-pandemic era. Thank you so much. And that's all for today's People's Daily Talk, and I'll see you next time.